Last term, we did one of the most foundational and I think church-changing series that we've ever done. We were looking at the thread of diversity throughout the whole Bible, and it was brilliant. But today, I think this current series, Finding Joy in Humble Circumstances, could be equally game-changing, and probably on a more personal level, more individual level, so it's going to be exciting about that. But I'm going to ask you to do something now you don't hear a lot of during a preach. Can you all please get out your phones? Okay? Good. I've seen a few of you surfing on these when I've preached before, so it shouldn't be a challenge for you. Now, what's going to happen is up on the screen, I need you to go to a website. It's www.menti.com, M-E-N-T-I. www.menti.com, M-E-N-T-I. www. And on there, when you get to the website, there's a code you need to put in, and the code is 2483 2015. Where are we as a church when it comes to joy? Kind of, what's our pulse? What we're feeling? And so, first question, if we scroll to the first one, just to make sure this is working and it's not going to be a complete car crash, if we go across to the next slide, does pineapple belong on a pizza? Yes or no? Straight away, you'll start to see it live updating. So far, 20, still going. Wow, what kind of church do we go to? 28 pineapple does belong on a pizza. Who knew? There you go. Next one, if we scroll to the next slide, just a question. We're doing the series on joy, and a bit of a joyometer. How joyful are you this morning? Be honest. 0 or 1 is you're not feeling very joyful. 10, you are full of joy. Where do you kind of slot yourself this morning? Coming in around about 7, few above, few below. Okay, there we go. Around about a bit better than average, but we're coming in as a church about 6, about 7. If we go to the next one, and this is going to really help me, I want to preach into where people are itching, but the next one I just want to ask is, what brings you joy? And on this next one, you can enter a word, you can enter 3 words, what is it that you find brings joy? For you personally. Sunshine, Jesus, chocolate. Oh, there we go, it's all coming up. Bigger the word, the more often it's been said. So family, a big one. Football, food, Jesus. Oh, we're flying in. Fast cars, wine. There we go. Kids, God. Okay, that's really helpful. Holidays, Liverpool losing. Amen. Okay. We'll stop there, but okay, so useful, I think, just to get a feel, when we're talking about joy, where are we currently landing? And this is going to be key because we're going to be speaking into what joy is and what joy isn't. And so, extremely helpful. Last one I want to go to is if we go to the last slide, what are some of the things, or what is it that you would say steals your joy? What is it that takes your joy away? See, this is quite key, isn't it? Fear, stress, anxiety, Satan, comparison, Boris Johnson. And this is honest stuff, and I'm not ridiculing it. Some of that stuff, it's where you're at. Clothes on the floor. Is that my wife? Wow, there we go. Okay, so just, I know it's probably hard to see at the back, but it's interesting, isn't it, to get a feel. Like this is about 70 odd of us in church, and some of this is deep stuff, and this is real stuff, and some of it is there's a whole lot of stuff in life which we say gives us joy, and there's a whole lot of stuff in life which steals our joy, and as it stands, as a church, we feel kind of roughly in the middle is where we'd say we're landing at the moment. And that's been helpful for me. Hopefully it's helpful having that now at the start of the series as we go through and really just seeing where that gets us and where that lands us. So I am impressed, guys. We had 60 people in East End Church knew how to use their phones. That's super good. Well done. If we jump back to the main slides, and again, I can try and get this out if anyone's interested afterwards, just to see where we are. But I'm going to be a little bit controversial. I think as a church we need to be more joyful. And I'm not saying we're a complete miserable bunch, but I am saying, and I'm talking about, I need more joy. I need more joy. And when I was getting ready for today, I asked myself the question, who are the most joyful people that I know? And I probably found that a harder question to answer than I thought I would. And, you know, it's partly sometimes the longer you've been coming to church, the less joyful you can perceive. So sometimes the people in church that have been here the longest can seem the least happiest or the least joyful to be here. And that is why this series, I really believe God wants to cultivate in us as a church a culture of joy. He wants to grow in us a culture of joy. And a culture in a biological sense in a lab is what are the perfect conditions for something to grow? You know, what's the right temperature, and what's the right nutrients, and what's the right lighting to make something grow? And the question we're going to look at this series is how do we maintain the right conditions for joy? How do we cultivate joy which doesn't depend on what is happening around us? And I'm going to do a little bit of foundational teaching this morning because I think joy is often something that's misunderstood. And if we don't get this right at the start of the series, we're going to be chasing after the wrong thing, which is happiness, or we're going to be looking for joy in the wrong places because we don't realize the source of joy. And so we're going to dig into a little bit of that today. One of the best places to teach from, it's Paul's letter to the church in Philippi. It's sometimes called the Book of Joy. And so we're picking up on the back of what Tom said last week. We are in chapter 1. We're picking up in verse 12. It will be on the screen with hopefully a few helpful translations for all of us as well. So if you've got your Bibles, Philippians 1, chapter 1, verse 12. It says this. Now, I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that what has happened to me has actually served to advance the gospel. As a result, it has become clear throughout the whole palace guard and to everyone else that I am in chains for Christ. And because of my chains, most of the brothers and sisters have become confident in the Lord and dare all the more to proclaim the gospel without fear. You see, it's true, some that preach Christ out of envy and rivalry, but others out of goodwill. The latter do so out of love, knowing that I am put here for the defense of the gospel. The former preach Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, supposing that they can stir up trouble for me while I'm in chains. But what does it matter? The important thing is that in every way, whether from false motives or true, Christ is preached. And because of this, I rejoice. Yes, I will continue to rejoice. Now, quick background, this letter, it is one of 4 that Paul wrote while he was in prison in Rome. He was in Rome waiting to make his defense to Caesar Nero, and they say it was written in about 61 or 62 AD. And the palace guard that we read about, they were basically the Praetorian Guard. They were the guards of the royal palace, and they were in the service of Caesar Nero. And Caesar Nero, he was one of the worst, as Tom said last week. He absolutely hated Christians. And these guards, they would have been keeping a close eye on Paul. They might have been with him the whole time, but I bet they would have been checking on him every couple of hours. And you can be sure when they popped in, Paul started having a bit of a chat to them. And he started telling them why he was there. And he started telling them about a man named Jesus and this guy who saved me, and he's turned my life around. And I think what's fascinating is while Paul was the one in prison, these guards were forced to listen to probably the greatest evangelist who has arguably ever walked the earth. And it says that soon word started getting out that this guy, he's different than all the other prisoners. He's got something about him. He's full of joy. He keeps banging on about a man named Jesus. And it says here, it was evident to the whole guard his chains are for Christ. And not just the guards, so the little bit, 3 words, it says, and to everyone else. And I love thinking of that in Nero's palace, maybe the cook came to know Jesus. Maybe his cupbearer came to know Jesus. Maybe the captain of the guard came to know Jesus. And it started spreading out like wildfire. And in the letter, we don't have time to focus on this bit. He mentioned some of them are preaching out of envy and rivalry. Paul kind of says, I don't care what your motivation is, provided you got your message right. And provided the message is Jesus, he says, I will rejoice. Now, last week, Tom mentioned, he said, what Paul does, he sees his circumstances as an opportunity. And stuff ain't gone the way he probably thought. He's locked up in prison. He probably got beat up. He probably hasn't gone the way he would have chosen, but he sees it as an opportunity. And as I read this challenges me to my core. Could that be said of me? You know, could it be said, it has become known to my whole office and to everyone else that my work is for Christ. It has become known to the whole school and to everyone else that my education is for Christ. It has become known to the whole hospital and to everyone else my illness is for Christ. And the passage finishes with the theme for the series that in all of this, Paul rejoiced. That this guy, he used to have everything, but he got shipwrecked. He got bitten by a snake. He's been beaten up. He's been put in prison. And he says in this, I will rejoice. And the question is why? And you see, I love that slide template. Often we don't focus. Mal's done. You see, the question we're looking at the series is, what is the key to joy? How do we unlock a kind of joy which cannot be taken away by any grief, any person, any circumstance, any situation? What does Paul teach us which we can apply here today? And to answer this, I want to look at 2 questions. Firstly, we're going to look at what is joy, and secondly, where to find it. Now, joy is not a word we've probably heard a lot of in the past 2 years. And often when the world talks about joy, and when the church sometimes talks about joy, they're actually talking about happiness. But you see, joy and happiness are not the same thing. And we live in a world where we're constantly told happiness is the key to a good life. That you've got these companies selling us happiness at every single cost. And we kind of suck on. We're like hoovers. we suck on to anything which will make us happy. Be it a relationship, be it a bit of money, be it a good job, be it a good holiday, be it a lot of the stuff. We suck on to that and say, if I had that, I will be happy. But happiness can often be very, very elusive, hard to find, and it can be short-lived. You see, West Ham, Thursday night, 58 seconds in, 1-0 down, sad. A little bit later, they pull one back, 1-1, happy. You go on a little bit later, and they lose 2-1, sad. And if my happiness and my joy, if my joy is linked to something which goes like that, I'm never going to find it. I'm never going to be satisfied. But, you see, anyone here got an iPhone 13? Come on. Jude, you've got one. There we go. So, I'm going to talk about the iPhone 13. I was looking it up this week, and on the screen, I was looking at the ad for the iPhone 13. It says this, "Oh, so pro." It goes on, and it says, "Hollywood in your pocket. Dramatically more powerful camera system. A display so responsive, every interaction feels new. Exceptional durability, and you've got these beautiful people taking these beautiful photos, and you've got videos in 8K, and the message is, you get one of these, man, you are going to be so happy. They're selling it, that you've got to have it." But you see, the same thing that can bring you happiness can be the same thing which shatters it in an instant. And when you get that phone call from back home, and they're saying, "Hey, I'm sorry, your dad's passed away." Or your phone rings and the doctor says, "Hey, it's not the news I want to give you." And this thing which you think will bring happiness can be the same thing which can absolutely rob you of that happiness in a second. And the reason companies sell these things so hard is because they know happiness is hard to get your hands on, and I'll tell you now, it's even harder to hold on to. And if we were to have a go at defining happiness, I'd probably say this. It says, happiness is an emotion, how we feel, and it's based off an outcome or a circumstance. Happiness comes and goes based off whatever is happening to us. But the Bible teaches us that God doesn't just want us to chase after happiness which comes and goes. He wants us to be filled with a joy which is rooted in something which doesn't change. He wants us to have joy which is rooted in something that doesn't change. And now, any husbands here who have had to venture into their wife's handbags will know what I'm about to talk about now. But when you go looking for the keys in that open land, that continent, that landmass called your wife's handbag, and you're diving into there and you're searching around, and like more can fit in those things, it's a miracle. And the moment you hear the jingle jangle of those keys and you find it, you're like, yes, eureka. It's like you've gone and found the treasure. And this morning, what I want to quickly do now is I want to look at the Greek word for joy. And we're not doing this because we're highbrow. Look at us. We're not doing this because I'm an expert at Greek. I'm not. But we're doing this because as I was preparing for this preach, it blew me away. And sometimes when you go a layer beyond the words in the Bible, it can fascinate you. And what I'm about to say, it's simple, but it has completely shifted my perspective on joy. And you see, we start off the Greek word for joy. The language the New Testament is written in is a word called chara. And this word, it means joy or to delight. Chara, it means joy or to delight. But when you trace this word back, it comes from the same root as another word called charis, which is grace. And what this shows us is that joy is rooted in something that doesn't change. And that is God's grace. That I can be aware of His grace. I can delight in His grace. I can be grateful for His grace. And that grace is something which does not change based off what is happening around me. And so if we defined happiness as an emotion based on circumstances, we can define joy as gratitude rooted in grace. It doesn't matter what's happening around you. It is permanent and it overrides what is going on. Gratitude rooted in grace. And so, guys, I hope that's helped just a little bit, just to really anchor. When we're talking joy, what we're talking about and what we're not talking about. Joy, happiness, not the same thing. But what I want to look at now is what Paul teaches us about where do you then find, that sounds good, doesn't it? Having a joy which doesn't change based off what happens in my dating. But what's the key? Where do I find that? And to answer that, I want to jump across to John. It's John 15, and Jesus gives one of his most well-known parables about how he is the vine and we are the branches. And it says this in John 15. It says, "If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you." And then it goes on and it says that no branch can produce fruit unless it is connected to the vine. And then he goes on and he says, "And I've told you this, so my joy may be in you and your joy may be complete." So he's given this picture of a tree. He says, I'm the vine, you're the branches, and if you remain in me, my joy will be in you and it will be complete. It will be full. And we're going to do another jump across to Galatians. So that parable, I think, reads well when you then look at Galatians 5:22 to 23, and it says this: "But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against things there is no law." What does all that mean? Well, just like I can't have an apple or grow an apple if it's not connected to a tree, we cannot have the fruit, which is joy, unless it's connected to the root, which is Jesus. We cannot have the fruit, which is joy, unless it is connected to the root, which is Jesus. And joy is not going to come from reading self-help books. Joy is not going to come from trying harder. Joy is not a character trait. Joy is staying positively rooted in Jesus. And when people are not happy, it's because something has happened which they don't like. If you're not happy, there's a circumstance or something's happened to you which you don't like. But when people are not joyful, it's because we've forgotten who we are in Jesus and we've forgotten the grace that he has shown to us. And I'm going to say this next thing not to be condemning, but just to hopefully encourage that if you are struggling with joy, where your root is going down into can be yourself. It cannot be Jesus. If you are rooting in yourself versus rooting in Jesus, that can lead to a struggle with joy. And it's going to show itself in two ways. When you're focusing on yourself, you will either live entitled, I deserve that. I earned that. I shouldn't have to wait for that. Why are they not on the rota? I've been on the rota 5 times. And when you're living an entitled life, you moan, you complain, you compare, and ultimately that's going to steal your joy. It came up, I noticed on the thing, self-envy, worrying about other people, comparison. When you do that, I think Roosevelt once said, comparison is the thief of all joy. So true, that when you're focusing on yourself, I'm entitled. The only thing you're entitled to, as we heard, is death, but through the cross, Jesus did that for us. The other one, when you're putting your root down in yourself, you can live a life of shame. And what that means is you say, you might be aware of what God's done, but I don't deserve that. Do you know what I've done? That came up, and do you know my life up to this point? Yeah, God's grace, I heard of that, but I don't deserve that. And in both cases, if you're entitled or if you're living a life of shame, you are saying that your view of what you get trumps God's view of what you deserve. You're saying that your view of what you get trumps what God says you should get. And God says this, he says, yeah, you did deserve death, but through my death on the cross, I am going to give you life. And life to its fullness, that produces gratitude, and gratitude is what produces joy. And I'm going to say this slow because I think it's important. Linking all that back to what we read about. Paul, he's full of joy, he's in prison, and he says this. Paul can rejoice in humble circumstances for 2 reasons. He's aware of God's grace in his life, and he's grateful for it. That comes up a lot. He's aware of God's grace. But he also gets joy from seeing that grace shown to others. As it's spreading through the palace, in this I will rejoice. He gets joy from receiving grace, and he gets joy from extending grace. And so I hope that's helped a little bit anchoring this. But what I want to do, I want to get super practical now. What would this look like for us as a church? Okay? So we've spoken a bit about what joy is. We've spoken a bit about where we find it anchoring in Jesus. And there was an analogy, I came across this. I usually find these things really stupid, but I actually found it helped that joy, if you went through it, just reminds me Jesus, others, you. And I don't know if you've heard it before, but it is that priority. Actually, I'm going to fix my eyes on Jesus. I am grateful for his grace. Others, it's about receiving grace and giving grace, and then you just having that grateful heart for what he's done. And what we focus on, I don't want you to leave here saying, I need more joy. I want you to leave here saying, I need more Jesus, okay? I don't need more joy, I need more Jesus. And joy is a fruit of the Spirit. Joy only grows when it is connected to the root. And he is saying, hey, I want you to stay in step with me. I want you to go where I go. I want you to remain in me. I want you to abide in me. I want you to stay where I am. Because joy, it's not a character trait, it is a person. That person is Jesus. Kara. I am going to be grateful for the grace that God has shown me, and that is not going to change. And this week, this series for the rest of your life, don't wish for the fruit. Don't wish I had more joy. What you can do, you prioritize your relationship with that root. You don't wish for the joy, you prioritize your relationship with Jesus. And last couple of minutes, I then want to say, practically, what would that look like for us as a church? If we were a church marked by joy, if we were a church which had a culture of joy, if we were a church which cultivated joy, what is that going to look like? Well, we'd be talking a lot less about practicalities and problems and preferences, and we'd be talking a lot more about people. And don't get me wrong, I probably know more than anyone some of the challenges going on in church with rotas and with reigns and different ways we could be doing things. I get that, and I'm not diminishing that, but we need to balance that. And I would far rather hear more conversations and have more conversations on how can we get more people into heaven and out of hell than some of that other stuff. And I think it's important we balance it. Actually, let's not lose sight of what we're here for. You see, a culture of joy would change our worship, because worship is an overflow of our hearts, and our hearts, when grateful for what God has done, it would overflow into our worship on a Sunday. An explosion of joy, it would change our prayer life. It would change what we spend our money on. It would change what we put our time into. A culture of joy means we'd be quicker to forgive, because we realize joy comes not from receiving grace, it also comes from giving grace. I'm going to be quicker to forgive, and that is going to bring me joy. They've probably moved on, I haven't. You see, a culture of joy means we're going to be a lot more grateful as a church. And I challenge you for the next few weeks, start each day with 2 things you're grateful for. Write them down. Don't start with your to-do list or your problems at work or the stuff on the news. You start, this is what I'm grateful for today. And I guarantee in a few weeks you're going to see a shift. You're going to see a shift. A culture of joy means we'll spend more time thinking of others than ourselves. And I tell you now, you are not going to become more joyful investing time in yourself. You are going to become more joyful when you see joy given and extended to other people. And when you do that, you're going to start seeing fruit grow on your tree, which you may not have seen in a long, long, long time. And the very last one, a culture of joy, Spirit-filled. It means that you might lose your job. You might have run out of money. You might have had the worst day with your kids. You might have had the biggest argument with your husband or wife. You may have struggled. Someone may have let you down. You may have gone through grief. You may have been backstabbed. You may have had the worst time ever. You could have been in prison. But you are still able to have joy on a scale of 10 because Jesus has given you and shown you his grace, and that cannot be taken away by whatever is happening around you. And I am going to be full of joy because he has shown his love and his grace and his mercy to me. I received that. I didn't deserve it, and that cannot change based on what happens in my day. And I am going to start my day with Jesus and spending time with him and staying rooted in him and reading his word and talking to him and telling others about him. And when I do all of those things, your problems aren't going to disappear, but they're going to seem smaller in the light of what he has done. And that is why I think this series is game-changing. Because joy, and the other fellas are going to unpack pieces of this over the coming weeks. Joy, it will change your relationship with Jesus. It will change your relationship with others, and it will practically touch every single area of your life. It's going to transform it. So guys, make much of Jesus. Encourage each other. See your circumstances as opportunities like Paul does. And know that if you're here and you've been searching for something and this sounds too good to be true, it's a step towards Jesus. And when you have him, there you will find something that no grief, no situation, no circumstance, and no pain can take away from you.